This was just last summer, back before the quarantine when life was far more normal. It was a late night in April, and I had taken my girlfriend out on a date. We were north of Settle Ford's conservation area in Missouri, the only area that I can really remember at the time. We were just driving around, BSing and talking. I had an idea up my sleeve to have an even better evening, since my girlfriend and I had been talking about wanting to have some fun. I pulled over to the side of the road, and out of my jacket pocket, I reached in and pulled out this gnarly joint my friends and I had wrapped days prior. I had planned this for a little bit. My girlfriend was surprised, but only had smoked a few times before. Before we even got the joint lit up, we were looking for a lighter, and I thought I had stuck it in my center console, when my girlfriend says, "Uh-oh, babe, put the joint away now. Cops here." I look up in the rearview mirror, and I see what looks like somebody approaching my car. Far enough away at the time that it looked just like a person, but as I watched this figure approach my car, something just didn't quite sit right with me. If this was a cop, where was their car? Why were they just randomly approaching the back end of my vehicle? Then I panicked and realized it's probably a Park Service employee about to bust us. But then I started to see more of its shape. It was dark outside, so keep in mind that until the shape got closer, I couldn't really have a great view. Then I saw the ears, the perky, upright dog ears, and what I thought to be a person looked massive and wide in the chest, like some sort of freakish bodybuilder. Something in my stomach and the very pit of it just told me that there's something wrong here. I had all these thoughts within about 5 seconds as my eyes locked onto this approaching figure that walked ever so slowly on 2 legs toward the back of my car. My girlfriend was watching me at the time, getting really nervous, asking me what's wrong. I asked her, "Look behind us and tell me what the hell is that?" She turns around at the same time, and we both start screaming. Right in this moment, the figure walking towards our car begins to drop down on all fours, like some kind of animal, and begins running towards our car faster. I throw the key into the ignition, not wasting a second, put the car in drive, bam, and we're out of there, just like that. It's hard for me to put into words what exactly it is that I saw. It was a large silhouette for the most part, that closely resembled some kind of creature, I guess. I don't even want to use that word. It sounds too fictional. Whatever it was, I could tell you it was not human. I'm not a person who makes up stories for fun, and I have nothing to gain from making this up. Plus, my girlfriend was with me, so she can verify that my story is correct. I don't know if there's such a thing as aliens, or if that's what this was, but when it dropped on all fours like an animal, that's when I really freaked. I mean, I will still drive by that area to this day, and just the memory of that coming back to me still gives me the chills. Now, when I do a date night with my girl, I don't try and pull off any desolate roads anymore, especially like that, next to a marshland. Has this experience changed my belief in monsters or things that aren't human? Not really. Even though I can't explain what happened to me, it's not enough to hit me over the edge into believing things like ghosts or anything of that. I just consider it an off-the-cuff experience, and I leave it in the past. At the time of this sighting, the only really lighting we had was what little moonlight there was outside. And where this figure was coming from, it was just a lone road. Whatever it was must have come out of the marsh and followed the road towards our car. I mean, my car was still on, the interior light was on, and I had my brake lights on. So maybe it was attracted to the lights. I'm not exactly sure, or if it even was an animal. But then again, they always say trust your gut instinct, and my gut instinct in that situation was saying bad, 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 get away. It's pretty clear that my girlfriend felt the same way, especially when she started screaming and yelling at me to drive. I felt like if I would have hesitated and stayed there even longer, well, who knows what would have happened. I wasn't in any rush to find out. The jungles of Vietnam held all sorts of freakish things that the soldiers opposing the Vietnamese military had to face. I'm sure you are well aware of many of the things, assuming you've spent any time at all hearing some of the things that went on during that war. But I bet you did know about some of the chilling true stories told by some soldiers about large canid creatures stalking the jungles at night, killing Vietnamese and US soldiers alike. There's all sorts of tunnels that were dug underground, for example. Some dug by animals, others dug by Vietnamese to store things and to create traps for opposing soldiers, which this was actually quite common. But there were also tunnels dug by these creatures. There have been reports of at least one half platoon that discovered one of these tunnels later on during the nighttime, hunting down potential Vietnamese soldiers that had fled from a nearby captured village. What they found was a series of tunnels that spanned about 30 feet below the ground, with an average width of around 9 to 10 feet and a height of around 14 feet. These tunnels were substantially large. They continued to lead deep underneath the earth and were even interconnected. That's before several of these soldiers were attacked by these large jungle wolves, they call them. The Vietnamese even had a word for them, which directly translated to jungle dogmen. They knew about them and even coexisted with them, just like they did all the other creatures of the jungle that posed an imminent threat to man. It was commonplace for these creatures to ascend out of these large tunnels at nighttime and hunt, which is when combat troops would come into contact with these same creatures. These things were reported to the US soldiers after they saw significant Vietnamese soldiers being ripped into pieces. In these tunnels, they had already found several corpses stashed away in sections of the tunnels, of US soldiers and Vietnamese, and villagers. Although depictions and descriptions of these beings were hard to come by, they were known to many of the local villagers as beings that just inhabited parts of the jungle. These beings would also stalk and kill other large predators, like big cats, monkeys, and whatever meat they can get their hands on. Remember that there are so many components to the Vietnam War, such as torture, famine, destruction, death, that because of that, it's hard to encompass such a bizarre abstract concept such as what I'm telling you. With so many distracting details and so many things wiped clean and hidden over the years, it takes a while and you have to talk to the right people before you can uncover the true details of things that really went on. Many true accounts and sightings lost to time and dead soldiers. But if you're adamant and you do the right digging, you can find all the information you need from all the right people. I'm not exactly comfortable giving away my identity, but I do have a few close relatives who served in the Vietnam War. On my side, as well as my wife's side, both US and Vietnamese. Once I relayed to these people how I have an interest in cryptids and have shared with them some of the interesting information I know, well, that's all it took to spark the conversation. And don't think these kinds of creatures were all they had out in the jungles. There were all sorts of nightmares waiting the US soldiers. I'm sure I can spend an entire afternoon sitting down with a pen and paper, jotting down all the stories and accounts these relatives of mine have to tell me. Yes, the times of war and destruction were absolutely terrible, and both sides of people faced horrendous acts of violence done against them in the name of war. Even with that being the main focus of the entire event, it's pretty rare that you even hear about some of the traps set by the Vietnamese for the soldiers. I'm just using that as an example to show that many of the minor details, such as the accounts I'm telling you, have gotten washed away in time and forgotten about over the blanket of more relevant details. I couldn't exactly find which parts of Vietnam that these creatures were segregated to, because I know that out of all the accounts I heard, with different things, not just these creatures, only a small segment had accounts of these particular creatures. And only a small segment of accounts that I've heard deal with these creatures in the tunnels. From what I've gathered, especially from some of my Vietnamese relatives, is that they were about as tall as a man, which means for them about 5 to 6 feet in height, and very wild looking. They basically referred to them as wild beasts of the jungle, and although they weren't always necessarily hostile, they typically acted very aggressive and territorial. I try and look at the whole thing from a very scientific perspective. It's very possible that there might be canid humanoid beings, but they're not these creepypasta, violent werewolf types of monsters that a lot of stories paint them out to be. At least to my beliefs. And from the accounts I've gathered, at least from my Vietnamese relatives, it seemed to be about the same thing. That's why I use the term coexisted. They seem to treat these beings as any other large alpha predator of the jungle. You avoid them and respect them. If you find yourself at the wrong area at the wrong time, well, you might be a victim. These relatives of mine are far into their 80s and 90s, and have absolutely nothing to gain from making this stuff up. I have grown very close to my wife's side of the family, and so gathering this type of information due to good relationships wasn't hard to do. But it just goes to show you, if you don't go digging for these lost details of a bloody war, then they'll be forgotten about forever, once many who saw the war pass away, forever gone. This is why it's so important for us scientists out there studying things that science doesn't necessarily recognize. We have to go the extra mile and dig even deeper to find the answers we seek.